First bucket stimulus was actually the third largest tax cut in American history. Most folks say, where was mine? With $288 billion of tax cuts in the stimulus. Didn't appear the way we would get rebate checks, but every family under $200,000 got basically $1,000 in tax cuts. First-time homebuyer tax credit, $8,000, cash for clunkers, a whole series of small business tax cuts. But that was 1/3 of the stimulus. Second third of the stimulus, this part you do understand, I know Lieutenant Governor Bolling does as well, was basically aid to states. Virginia got, I think, north of about $3 billion that otherwise would have made the cuts in Richmond exponentially worse. I remember I was back in Richmond during the General Assembly in January. A couple of my friends and the Republican members of the House came up to me and they said, Governor, we were out having a beer, and they came up and they said, Governor, we're going to keep kicking you in the tail for being big spenders in Washington, but please keep those stimulus checks coming. And again, frankly, I think without those, Virginia's budget would look like California. And that is not something any responsible state aspires to look like. The last third, the stimulus, frankly, was not truly stimulative. But they were probably projects that, again, regardless of our partisan identification, were necessary early investments. High-speed rail, broadband, healthcare IT, smart grid. And on those dollars, there are still about 50% of them that have not been spent out, and we've had some success, particularly in broadband, healthcare IT. We've not had as much on high-speed rail, although we got a couple recent announcements on it. Good areas, but candidly, not stimulative in terms of being spent out quick enough. So on a controversial part, I would actually say history will treat President Bush and President Obama for both of these items as averting what could have been a dramatically worse crisis. But we also have to acknowledge that government has pretty much used its tools. In an economy, in a recession, government has two tools to try to stimulate growth. One, at the federal level at least. One is monetary policy, lowering interest rates. And the Fed has done just about all it can. Matter of fact, it's now doing things that are kind of out there a little bit. Government, in terms of the federal level, those stimulus dollars are not going to, it's all right with me on cell phones, you've heard that line from me before. Those of you who are newly elected, I used to have a real job, I was the co-founder of Nextel, so I am known as the one politician that says, even when I'm talking, leave your cell phones on. But federal stimulus dollars basically are going to run out, and there will not be another stimulus. You know, there's, again, some things we can do around the edges. One thing that the Congress recently passed that should have been done a year ago was small business lending. I mean, one of the areas where we desperately need to do more, back to some of the questions about how we generate small business growth, a lot of it relates to the ability to get credit. And we still have enormous challenges to get the banking industry to loosen up credit, particularly to small business, particularly to smart startup businesses. But government has basically used its tools in terms of how we climb out of this recession. But there is good news, and good news that doesn't get reported. And that is that large American businesses have used this recession, sometimes in a way that's been pretty brutal, in terms of cutbacks and increased productivity. But corporate 1,000 companies in America today are financially healthier today than they were in 2007. There is now north of $2 trillion in cash sitting on corporate American balance sheets. So part of our challenges going forward has to be, how do we get that money off of the balance sheets and reinvested in America? And frankly, that is an area that is going to require cooperation and collaboration at the state level, at the local level, and at the federal level. Let me talk for a couple more minutes before we open to questions about where I think, from a national standpoint, and then with some Virginia specifics, where we need to refocus some of our efforts broadly economically. We need a refurbishment and a refreshment of an innovation and growth agenda around America. We need federal policies, state policies, and local policies that support early-stage startup companies. We basically have both tax policies and financial policies that exist now in the world that don't support early-stage capital creation. Because with the flip of a key switch on a computer, you can move hundreds of billions of dollars overnight to pick up 20 extra basis points on a return. Who wants to do the hard early-stage capital creation that early-stage companies are going to create? We need to have it. And part of that will be building off one of Virginia's greatest assets, our world-class universities, and making sure that we do a better job of continuing to push out the research and development from our universities into startup companies. But an innovation and growth agenda that has to be across the spectrum, and again, starting with some national, both investment policies and tax policies. Second, one of the greatest areas, I think, for job creation over the next 25 years, and I would argue probably the single greatest area, and it pains me to say this as a telecom and computer guy, but the next 25 years, if I'm talking to a business school class today, where I would recommend your sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters go into is the energy sector. And I believe we don't even need to get to the religious debate about climate change. Just from the standpoint of job creation and national security, it continues to make absolutely no sense to spend $600 billion a year of our money to buy oil from countries that support the terrorists that attack our people. Much more diverse energy portfolio. The yes includes the renewables, but also includes coal, includes nuclear, includes oil and gas. We got to have all of the above in this category. I'll be out a little bit later today talking about some $5 million we got from the feds in terms of some green job growth training dollars. In Pennsylvania County, there was a great announcement out recently in terms of a solar company going in, a couple hundred jobs there. But look at the opportunity. Let me just give you, again, a quick little aside. America's largest export is airplanes. We sell net $1 trillion on the plus side of airplane exports every year. It's good news. If we look at the solar business, solar is always only going to be just a small piece of the energy mix worldwide. But 10 years ago in America, 8 out of the 10 largest solar companies in the world were American. Today, there are 2. From 2000 until 2010, 10 years ago, China had no solar business at all. Today, they've got, depending on how you cut it, either 3 or 4 of the top 10 solar manufacturing companies. And China alone, in 10 years, now exports, on the net positive side, $500 billion worth of solar equipment worldwide in an industry that didn't even exist 10 years ago in China. So getting it right on energy, China's probably never going to sign on to any kind of global climate change accord. But they have made the business decision that this is a space we ought to be in. We as Americans ought to not be ceding energy innovation to any other country in the world. So that ought to be a second area. Third area that we really need, and this is something that Heart and Soul, particularly South Side and Southwest Virginia, can help us as we go through, is I'm all for technology, I'm all for innovation, but America needs a 21st century manufacturing strategy. We need to make things again in America. One of the, if you look at Germany, Germany pays higher taxes, has more unions, pays higher wages than we do in America, yet they have come through this recession in a stronger position than almost anyone else because they have an advanced manufacturing sector.